Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending them in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect, it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
Colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organization should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
we become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem.
Ensure,
We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossiers. You can't agree to that. How are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals
So
are
do you
not
think
impinged.
do you think
Number
COVID
one.
do you think
And
COVID
number
do you think
two,
COVID
if I may.
do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over our cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
This is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire We had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about it?
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
Killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament, I...
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean to the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The major's assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me and he said, sir, you got to come in and talk to me a sec. He says, we've made the decision we're going to war with Iraq. I said, we're going to war with Iraq? Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show. But if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into Redacted on this Tuesday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
And on this show, we tend to cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores. We try to cut through the propaganda and tell you the truth here. So thank you guys all for joining us. We have a very busy show for you on this Tuesday. We're going to be looking at the UK and the United States. Are some new legislative chicanery loopholes basically going to allow Brits to fight in Ukraine, and are United States troops readying for deployment in Ukraine? Of course, all of this is tied to money and whether or not we're going to actually be sending more money to Zelensky. President Biden has been warning us about that. If we don't send money, we're going to have to send American troops. The same thing, I guess, is happening with Britain as well.
Right. Why should that happen? British people voted for Brexit. Why should they then be pulled into the European Union through a trade agreement? We're going to take a look at that with our guest today, Jim Ferguson. We also are going to talk about President Zelensky from Ukraine going to Washington to remake the case, as American politicians seem to be weary of sending money to Ukraine. He needs to sort of pump some juice into that. So we're going to take a look at that.
And we're also really excited because Tucker Carlson is going to be joining us live here on Redacted in just a short time from now. So we've got a very busy show. Of course, Tucker is launching a brand new streaming service. What will this mean for free speech and removal of censorship? We can't wait to talk with Tucker. So yes, Tucker will be joining Redacted here in just a few minutes from now. So all of that and more as Redacted starts right now. In our chat says, why is Redacted so short today? I think he was looking at the rundown, and it's like, well, we've got some some pretty big segments and some in-depth segments today, but we're going to allow some time to talk to Tucker. So we're not cramming as many things into the show today. We're going to allow some breathing room to be able to have a conversation.
Yeah, but still settle in. We intend to be here the same amount of time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. So we are going to get to a lot of the news here, but first we want to tell you about our daily newsletter. It's totally free, and it's our way to stay connected to you guys. Again, you don't have to pay for it. All you need to do is go over to redacted.inc. It's a great way to start your morning. We cover about 4 or 5 of the biggest stories of the day. We try to add a little humor to it, and you can read it over your cup of coffee first thing in the morning. Like it should take you about 5 or 10 minutes to read it over your cup of coffee in the morning. And again, totally free. And as you know, these big tech platforms love to censor independent media. So this is our way with our newsletter of being able to stay connected with you. In fact, there was a time we were banned a couple of times here on this platform, and the only way for us to stay connected to you guys was to send you an email to let you know, yep, we've been banned. So that's the way to do it. Go to redacted.inc. You'll receive a welcome email from me. Just got to drag us into your inbox, and then tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning, you'll receive the newsletter about 7 a.m. Eastern time. So again, redacted.inc, not .com. It's redacted.inc.
Are British and American soldiers about to be sent to Ukraine to fight against Russia? Politicians are warning that a tricky trade agreement called the Permanent Structured Cooperation, we're going to call it PESCO, could be used to pull the UK right back into the EU by military cooperation. Jim Ferguson is a former parliamentary candidate and a businessman and entrepreneur based in the UK. He's been warning about this issue, so thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here, Natali. Thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, so can you explain this? You say that Ursula von der Leyen is sort of masterminding a way to re-encompass the UK in order to build out an army, which would then draw soldiers into a land war against Russia or whoever else next, right? Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I think it's important to point out the disaster that the Ukraine war against Russia has been. I mean, we've seen about between 600 and 700,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed in this pointless war. And it's not for the reasons they've been stating. There's a lot of money laundering going on. There's a lot of other things that are happening there. But what's concerning me here, Natali, is that Ursula von der Leyen is essentially looking at subsuming all of the militaries within the European Union member states. So she's wanting absolute control over all of them. It's not correct to call it an EU army. It is a defence union. And you're quite correct in pointing out about PESCO, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, because it's not what people think it is. However, what's really important here is that what they're going to want to do, and this will encompass British nuclear deterrence. So effectively, Germans, Ursula von der Leyen and her friends in Germany and Brussels, will be in charge of Britain's nuclear Trident fleet, along with the British military, the British Army, the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy. But it gets a lot worse than that, because they also want the security apparatus. Now, collectively, that's known as the Secret Intelligence Service, or the SIS. But that encompasses our internal security services, being MI5, and our foreign intelligence services, being MI6. But it also encompasses GCHQ in Cheltenham, which is a worldwide global listening post that deals with highly sensitive communications. Now, that also will go on to frontline policing. So it's not going to stop there. It will actually go on to policing and command structures there as well. The incredible thing is that this will also go into the industry with a single point command in and control overseen by Brussels. And people have been saying, well, you know, how could this have happened? Well, people have been warning about it. So, for example, Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, is quoted as saying, placing any significant equities in Brussels would be a huge mistake. Now, he's one of the most respected former heads of MI6, I think, that the country has ever had. He was a true patriot, an incredibly intelligent man, and he understands deeply the risks involved. I mean, it goes back to even 1984 when Margaret Thatcher was in charge. They tried to do it then with her. She was having none of it. But when Tony Blair got into power, followed by the likes of Theresa May, of course, Richie Sunak, backed up by Jeremy Hunt, we are now witnessing potentially a major sellout of our British military capability, but also the British people.
So can I just stop you and ask a question about intentionality then? Because I think that British voters might say, wait, we voted for Brexit. We voted not to be aligned with the European Union. And so is it, I called it sneaky in the beginning, but what you seem to be saying is that politicians understand that this is sort of a restitching of the bounds that were broken. So are you sort of saying that these politicians understand what they're doing, and this is maybe what one politician called a trade agreement that either replaces or reinforces NATO?
Yeah, well, I mean, what you've got is you've got some Conservative MPs that are being sort of mollycoddled. They're sort of being brought in and tempted to go along with this. But the Tory grandees that knew exactly what was involved, they thought that by going along with it, that they were going to get defence contracts for their own constituencies.
Oh,
but
of course.
That's not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen because Ursula von der Leyen has stated that there will be one single EU-appointed defence contractor that will be chosen by Brussels, and it's the contractor for the whole arrangement. In other words, every bullet, every bomb, every artillery and tank round that's going to be manufactured by this single defence contractor will be chosen by Brussels. The UK will have no say in it. And she's gone on to say that there will be no negotiation. So it's important to point out they're not building an EU army. People have said they're building an EU army. They're not. They're simply taking over all the existing militaries within the frameworks that exist within their member states. And of course, you're quite correct to point out that Britain voted to leave. Britain voted for Brexit. However, what the people didn't realise was when it came to defence and security, that was not part of the arrangement. Theresa May signed that off before anybody could get a chance to analyse what was really going on. Now, the other really important thing here is that this will give them a full political union with tax implications. So that means that the British taxpayer could end up funding a lot of this, as if we didn't have enough to worry about. But the bureaucratic arrangements, they're already there. They're ready to go. And the civil servants think that it's going to be some kind of a la carte menu that they can choose what to take part in or what not to. No, it's all
and did they
in.
learn that from COVID when yeah, right? Okay. That's a silly dream.
Yeah, it is. But the other thing to point out, that there is no technical difficulties in any of this, because these control systems have been built by the Royal Navy to NATO standards. And at the flick of a switch, this can all be transferred across. This is supported by the bureaucrats. This is supported by the civil service, because they think they're going to get to pick and choose. They won't. And I'll just finish off by saying that the person that actually built this system is a former Royal Navy engineer. But in terms of a national veto, because some people have said, well, we'll have a national veto. If there's something that the EU are going to try to do, we've got a national veto. Well, Ursula von der Leyen has stated, and it's on the record, and she's basically said there will be no veto in defence and security. So you've got Cameron and Ritchie in there. They've already said to the defence heads of staff, there's no more funding for you. They've been denied in a number of meetings where the defence heads of department have said, look, we need more funding. If we're potentially going to fight a war with Russia, we need more funding. They've said, no, you're not getting it. But what they are trying to do, Natali, is they're trying to basically sign over our military capability, our defence and security apparatus in its entirety. By the way, there is no pick and choose, and there is no national veto. If they do this, if these globalist parasites like Sunak and Hunt get away with doing this, then it's only a matter of time before they find themselves in a position where they've no national veto, and our military are being deployed potentially in Ukraine to fight against Russia. But it gets worse, because Ursula von der Leyen may well decide to call up the British reserves, the special forces, the paras, the Marines. It's all part of it. And then, of course, you've got conscription. They may decide they're really going to go for Russia, and they're going to start to call up people, civilians, to put them into some kind of military capability. And we've seen the meat grinder that is the Ukraine-Russia war. And the last thing I want to see is that happening to British people. We've got enough to be concerned about without that. These people that are running the show are globalists. They are not loyal to the people of the countries that elect them. They're loyal to their globalist masters. In the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and many others. And it's high time that people realise that. And there is no credible opposition, because Sir Keir Starmer of the Labour Party, the official opposition to the Conservatives, they're Davos people too. They're World Economic Forum members. They are globalists. Who do we vote for, Natali? And for a long time, we've been sort of trying to decide who is the least worst to vote for. You know, who's the least worst? What a terrible state of affairs Britain is in. But this will also have big implications for our friends in America and our traditional allies.
Right. Say more about that, because you write here on a fantastic post that I want to encourage people to seek out at Jim Ferguson, at Jim Ferguson UK on X, that this horror of handing over sovereignty to unelected globalists who run the EU, such as Ursula von der Leyen, is magnified by the staggering casualty figures from the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict, with estimated Ukrainian military deaths ranging between 600 and 700,000. Obviously, we don't ever have wanted those people to die, and we don't want to follow them. So it would be a domino effect, is what you're playing out here, is UK followed by US boots on the ground against Russia, who were being led into a war based on a lie. I'm saying that. You didn't say that, but why don't you say more about this domino effect of soldiers?
Well, it's so they've got such a problem now with manpower. They've lost so many soldiers in Ukraine that they're even now turning to conscript women to go and fight against these seasoned, battle-hardened Russian troops. It's absolute madness. It should never have got to this stage. It should never have happened. And unfortunately, Boris Johnson, Joe Biden could have had a peace deal on the table. Russia was more than prepared to sit down and negotiate, and I believe they still might be. But the danger is that Britain is going to get dragged in, and our people and our military sacrificed on the altar of globalism to suit Ursula von der Leyen and her German high command. And I'll tell you something else. the thought of British nuclear capability being in the hands of the Germans just does not sit well with me, and it doesn't sit well with the British people. We must remember our history. 2 world wars caused by Germany. Let's hope there's not a third one.
Right. Well, thank you for breaking this down for us. I don't know, well, like you pointed out, who are we going to tell about this other than each other? Who do we vote for instead? Do you have anything to leave us on?
Well, I think that, I've engaged with a lot of political parties in the UK. I'm not a member of any political party at the moment. I'm a former Brexit Party parliamentary candidate with the European Union and with Westminster. But I can tell you that there are very good people like Ben Habib, the Deputy Leader of Reform. Nigel Farage, of course, I'm one of his guys, and Nigel was very good to me when I was campaigning in the target seat of Barnsley East. I think you're going to see people rise to the challenge. I think people are ready to say, we're not going to comply with this globalist diktat any longer. And this real manipulation by Ursula von der Leyen to try to seize control of British military, potentially leading to war, potentially leading to conscription, is unacceptable. And I believe it will be unacceptable to the vast majority of British people who actually voted for Brexit. We voted to leave. I spent a lot of time fighting for that. And I'm pretty sure that people are going to, when they realise what's being proposed by these dreadful people running our government, like Richie Sunak at the moment, they're going to say, no, this can't happen. But the defence and our generals, our commanders, they need to step up also. I understand they have to follow orders, but there comes a point where you've got to say, this is going against everything, our principles, our beliefs, and national security is at serious risk here. This is madness. This cannot be allowed to go ahead unchallenged. And I don't believe it will. I think that people will fight back and push back against it, hopefully before it's too late.
Well, thank you for pointing this out. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to have you back on Redacted. Please come back another time.
Thank you, Natalie. Always great to be with you guys. Thanks so much indeed.
Thanks so much, Jim. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you guys for subscribing. Coming up here in just a few minutes, Tucker Carlson is going to be joining us live here on Redacted. We're going to talk about the new Tucker Carlson Network, among other things. We're going to have a wide-ranging discussion. I want to ask him his thoughts on President Trump and whether or not the deep state will allow him to become president. We'll talk about that and so much more. So please smash that like button. If you do actually hit the like button right now, it actually pushes us further out into the algorithm. And this is a little trick that maybe YouTube hasn't figured out yet. I don't know. But when you do actually hit the like button, when we're live, it actually pushes us further out to people who might like to watch the show. So yes, Tucker's going to be coming up here in a moment. And we're also going to be talking about Zelensky in Washington, D.C. and what that actually looks like.
Right.
It's been a crazy
What
trip.
do you think he wants? Do you think when that guy comes around? Just a thought.
He wants to go to the Smithsonian.
Maybe.
He wants to take in a few museums.
Mexican food. Who knows? What do you do when you go visit the U.S.?
Yeah, I don't know. So we're going to get to that in a second. But first, many families are asking in the comments section lately, where do you put your money to be safer right now, avoid losses and depreciation? We did actually get some good CPI numbers today, and tomorrow the Fed will speak on rate cuts. Will we see more rate cuts? And that could be really good news for people who want to put their money in the stock market right now or buy up commodities, buy up ETFs, things like that. And certainly gold and silver also looking very, very brilliant. And our friends over at Moomoo, that's my favorite trading app and platform. They are right now offering up to 15 free stocks when you sign up and make your initial deposits in your account. And all you need to do is use that link on your screen at redacted.inc/Moomoo. And they've just launched their new cash account. It's unbelievable. It's an interest-bearing account, 5.1% interest. That's right. 5.1% API. So you know how your normal savings account that you get at your local bank is terrible? It's like 0.01% interest. It's awful. I don't even know why they have savings accounts at local banks. They're just awful. But Moomoo actually has it 5.1%. So if you're sitting there with some money in the bank and you're thinking, well, where should I put it right now so that I can protect my family? Maybe I don't want to even invest in stocks. I don't want to buy commodities. Well, great. Then you could use this and make 5.1% in cash sitting in that account right now. So again, I'm waiting on what the Fed does tomorrow. I'm going to make some decisions on what's, different mining stocks and different things to buy tomorrow after the Fed speaks, after Jerome Powell speaks. But in the meantime, that is sitting there in cash and earning 5.1% API. So again, how to take advantage of this right now is go to redacted.inc/Mumu to take advantage of that. We'll have links in the description below as well, so you can take advantage of that and sign up today. Well, let's talk about Ukraine, because over the past 2 years, one of the greatest hoaxes ever perpetrated on the American people was meticulously carried out by the deep state. And it had all of the help of the propaganda arm of the United States media. Everything went from the Associated Press to CNN to the New York Times. So it's not hard to believe that a majority of Americans actually fell for it. Americans are trusting people. They're hardworking. They're busy. They're taking care of their families. And when they flip on CNN or something for a brief few moments and they hear this rhetoric and this propaganda, they went along with it, unfortunately. Americans were told that Ukraine was invaded by the demonic Russian army in an unprovoked attack. They didn't know the history going back to 2014. Americans were told that Ukraine was a democratic country with a selfless hero named Vladimir Zelensky, a man in a green T-shirt who turned down an evacuation by the Biden administration to stay and fight in Ukraine. This guy was a hero. He just needed bullets and our support.
When rumors surfaced that he was fleeing the capital, however, he pushed back with a video of him and his leaders in the street, saying, "We're still here." And when the Biden administration offered an evacuation, he said, "I need ammunition, not a ride."
Yeah. And that was echoed in the mainstream media. I need ammunition, not a ride. And man, you saw CNN. Everyone was like, wow, this guy's brave.
Mm-hmm.
This is a leader.
Yeah.
Screw Putin. This guy's the real hero, right? And it worked. I mean, Americans hung Ukrainian flags on their houses. They updated their Twitter bios and put Ukrainian flags there.
The sacrifice.
I mean, the sacrifice they made was overwhelming, right? They opened their wallets and actually donated money. They opened their homes and welcomed refugees in.
A lot of people took the pictures of their family on Facebook and put a Ukrainian tint across the, of the Ukrainian flag.
They really went all out.
Yeah, that's really showing the world.
They invited Zelensky to hang Ukrainian flags in United States Congress. They let him speak at a joint session of Congress, which is an honor which is only reserved for people who control the United States. We only let people who we answer to speak in front of a joint session of Congress. The propaganda was incredibly strong, and most Americans, of course, fell for it. Falling for it allowed the United States Congress to send over $200 billion to Ukraine. I love seeing this fake number floating around of $111 billion. Let's be honest. We know that that's just the batch of money that they've set aside for Ukraine. The tens of billions of dollars that is secretly and had already been funded to Ukraine is well over $200 billion. It's one of the largest boondoggles in American history. More than 500,000 Ukrainians are now dead. American defense companies set record profits. The CEO of Raytheon casually admitted the truth that the war in Ukraine is very profitable.
You made some public comments a while back about how, the conflict would likely result in an increase in your business. Some took issue with that. That seems like a logical consequence of what's going on, right?
Yeah, it's fair enough. Look, we don't apologize for making these systems, making these weapons. I make no apology for that. I think, again, recognizing, we are there to defend democracy. And the fact is, eventually, we will see some benefit in the business over time.
Yeah, we will.
Some benefit.
Yeah.
A little bit.
The Biden administration is now threatening Americans. Ukraine needs more money or Putin will win. And Americans will need to go fight in Ukraine, as we just talked with Jim Ferguson about. Like, this is really happening in the UK and in the United States. President Biden said this last week. And Secretary of State Blinken reminded all of us this week that war has been great for American companies, so you should be happy about this.
Footnote on this, and this is more for the American audience. If you look at the investments that we've made in Ukraine's defense to deal with this aggression, 90% of the security assistance we provided has actually been spent here in the United States with our manufacturers, with our production, and that's produced more American jobs, more growth in our own economy. So this has also been a win-win that we need to continue.
It's a win-win. He says that with a straight face. It's a win-win. Well, this week, America's second favorite world leader behind Benjamin Netanyahu was back in Washington begging for more money. He's going to meet with President Biden and the Speaker of the House, the new Speaker of the House. But before he does that, he met yesterday with his main benefactors, of course, the United States defense industry. I mean, this was an unbelievable. Let's get the cameras here. Let's make sure he's shaking hands with all of these defense contractors. There he is, shaking hands with the Lockheed Martin's executives, Boeing executives, Northrop Grumman. Can you imagine all these guys in one room? And he wears his Ukrainian T-shirt. Like, this is the guy. He's coming here, and he's meeting with them before he's meeting with President Biden, because you know exactly who his paymasters are. General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, all of them were there. And it was an unbelievable moment. And then he tweeted this, actually. So he went into great detail about this. This is what Zelensky tweeted. I met with the leaders of the U.S. defense companies and expressed my gratitude to every American worker who manufactures weapons that help us safeguard our people and defend our land. I appreciated all American companies that attended last week's U.S.-Ukraine Defense Industry Conference. I also proposed establishing a European defense hub in Ukraine. We are prepared to make all essential decisions, cut red tape, and allocate orders. Now, that sounds like a great idea. Think about that, right? It's the most corrupt country in Europe. So let's build a European defense hub in this location. He says, we'll cut red tape. What red tape do you have to begin with? We can't account for the weapons that we've already sent you. We can't account for the money we've already sent you. You're going to cut red tape? How much more red tape is there to be cut? And we're going to allocate orders, making sure that so Ukraine will become the NATO defense. We've said it all along that the whole purpose of this was to turn Ukraine into an aircraft carrier for NATO, put weapons on display so people can make orders, use it as like a training ground, a proving ground. So people can come and watch how weapons are used and destroy and leveraged. He says, we are ready to produce more ammunition and military vehicles, but we require support. It's important to develop joint production of artillery, ammo, air defense systems, and artillery and missile systems. Together, we can create more jobs, generate more strength, and provide more opportunities for both of our nations. And here's the photo op, of course, with these guys after the big meeting there, all of the defense contractors that shook hands with him, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, of course, they're all there. However, something is different this time in Washington, D.C. with Zelensky's trip there. You know, before, of course, he was speaking in front of a joint session of Congress. Not anymore. Zelensky is this time, though, being met with a cold shoulder by members of Congress. And U.S. headlines showing this time as he arrives in Washington. Winter, advantage Russia. Biden and package risks collapse. Ukraine on brink of losing war. I've seen a number of headlines talking about this is not good. This is not good for him now rolling into Washington, D.C. J.D. Vance told Steve Bannon today that people in Washington want to cut Social Security benefits in order to give money to Ukraine so Zelensky's ministers can buy yachts. Those are J.D. Vance's words. Listen.
You have a foreign leader coming to the United States like we're some sort of geopolitical Salvation Army. That is not the role of the United States here, is to hand out money to every beggar who comes into our country and demands that we fund their foreign conflict. So Zelensky is parachuting into this domestic political debate about prioritizing our own border. He's not here to tell us anything we haven't heard before. He's here to badger and browbeat Speaker Johnson and Senate Republicans into foregoing our negotiations on border security in order to write him another blank check. I've never seen anything like this. This is not Churchill coming in the midst of World War II. This is literally a guy begging for a handout and telling Republicans to stop negotiating over your own border security. I'm offended by it. As a United States Senator, I'm offended by it. We should be focused on our own border and be having that debate. We don't need Zelensky to parachute and tell us how to run our country. You have people in this town saying we need to cut Social Security. There are people who would cut Social Security, throw our grandparents into poverty. Why? So that one of Zelensky's ministers can buy a bigger yacht? Kiss my ass, Steve. It's not happening.
Kiss my ass.
Kiss my ass, Steve. It's not happening. Yeah. T-shirt boy comes to Washington, D.C. and asks for more money. $61 billion this time. $61 billion is what we need in order to make this happen.
Now, Republicans continue to say they're not going to put up this money without any kind of guarantee around the border security. We'll see what happens. I mean, we're on the edge of our seats.
I mean, yeah, Senator Vance said, look, this is the first time he's actually seen Republicans somewhat united around something, which is maybe border security. It's convenient that, now it's it's almost an election year, so that's now suddenly a concern to them.
Okay.
And going to torpedo a Ukraine budget. We'll see. So will Republicans hold strong, or are they going to cave and send billions more to Ukraine? We will know the answer to this very, very soon. Maybe they'll do it and they'll sneak home for Christmas break, which is what they usually do. So let us know in the comments below what you think about that. We've got more news to get to here on your Taco Tuesday.
It's Tucker Tuesday.
It's Taco Tuesday and Tucker Tuesday.
And we once had Tucker over for tacos. Remember that?
Holy shit, that's right.
We did.
That's very meta. Yeah.
I made them in the crock pot. I'm kind of embarrassed about that now.
So Tucker Carlson will be joining us in just a few minutes. We're excited to talk to him about the launch of his brand new network. So he will be joining us in just moments. And we will get to that in just moments.
But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Aries Tech. Now, if you are concerned about the electromagnetic fields and radiation around your mobile devices, you are not alone. A lot of people are concerned about this because, of course, the device you're streaming on is emitting electromagnetic radiation, and we don't know enough about it to know how safe it is. Our cell phones, our laptops, our tablets, they all are sources of EMFs. In fact, France even recently banned the sale of the iPhone 12 for breaching the radiation exposure limit in Europe. Science has proven that even low levels of radiation can have an impact on our health, ranging from disruptive sleep, we talked about that just last night with blue light, fertility issues, and more serious things like neurological decline. So, of course, as we introduce more and more tech into our lives, this problem only escalates. But before you panic and throw out your devices, you should meet Aries Tech. They're the only scientific, trusted EMF protection solution. They neutralize harmful electromagnetic radiation and effectively counteract any negative impacts on your body. It's a revolutionary method for protection that goes beyond traditional blocking techniques, so you need to check it out for yourself. Go to ariestech.com. That's AIRES tech.com. Use promo code redacted30 for 30% off. That's promo code redacted30 at checkout, and enjoy your tech without worrying while boosting your well-being. So again, check out Aries Tech today. Use promo code redacted30 for 30% off today.
All right. Well, yes. Tucker Carlson is going to join us in just seconds. Just want to make sure our audio is good to go and everything is swimming on his side. Make sure that everything is good to go on their side. Hopefully it is. Hopefully it is. Make sure good.
We all good, dudes?
Is it? It is. It is. All right. All right. Well, we want to welcome in our friend Tucker Carlson now because, wow, dropped a bombshell on the media industry this week with the launch of a brand new network, Tucker Carlson Network, and we're thrilled to have our old friend back here on Redacted to talk about that and so much more. Tucker, welcome into the show. Great to see you, my friend. Congratulations on the big announcement.
Well, congratulations to you both. I texted you about this, but it's like every week someone comes up, have you heard of Clayton and Natali Morris and their show Redacted? Yeah, I know them. You know them? It's
you're very
so
sweet.
Cool. I am a fan of your show, let me just say. And not just because I agree with everything, but because, which I do, but because there's just so much information. I love it. So congratulations to you.
Well, very, very sweet of you. Very, very kind of you to say. And that's a very Tucker thing to do when all the news is about Tucker and the big story is about Tucker Carlson and the launch of this new network, to turn it around on someone else. So I know this must be difficult for you because there's so much focus on you right now, and you're not comfortable with that. You love covering the news. You love covering other people. You love covering other stories. And so, it's amazing to me to see you launch this network. What was this gestational process like for you kicking off this network?
Well, I mean, it was ideological. As you know, one of the big differences between you and me is, you guys are good at business. I'm not. I'm not interested. I don't think about it. My brain doesn't work that way. Kind of the last thing I want to do is start a business and think about that kind of thing. But it just dawned on me, based on my own experiences, including recent ones, that, you really need to be protected if you have a shot of saying what you really think is true, particularly in the coming 12 months, which is, I mean, it's the most intense period, and not just in this country, but around the world. I mean, lots of places are changing dramatically. The whole world is reshuffling, and there's going to be a lot of pressure to shut people down because the information war is the real war, of course. Words are more powerful in the end than, anything Raytheon sells, and more enduring. So they're going to try and stop people from noting obvious truths about what's happening, and if you want to be one of the few who is able to say what he thinks, you cannot be dependent on advertisers or big companies. You just can't. And that means you have to set up some kind of system that pays for a fortress of reporters and that is, immune to advertiser pressure. It's just essential, and that means subscriptions, basically.
Right.
Right, but what scares me about doing something like that, also hello, haven't said hello myself, long time no talk.
Hey, Natali.
How are you?
It's great to see you.
Yeah, you always call me Mrs. Morris, so thanks for calling me Natali on the show. So one of the things that bothers me about doing something like that, which I guess you've sort of fortified your backbone about, is that when you have a platform now that is practicing free speech, the government tries to penetrate it with litigation or subpoenas or so it's from the outside in. So are you afraid of that kind of thing, of being attacked like we've seen just this week now, government going after Twitter, asking them about how they're protecting misinformation around abortion and that kind of thing. So what'd you do to get ready for that?
I mean, I say my prayers every morning, take a sauna, try to spend time with my wife and dogs and kids. Those are things that you kind of can't prepare yourself for ahead of time. Have a ready pool of cash for legal defense, of course. But really, it's inside you. Are you the sort of person who's going to get beaten down and give up? And so you need to keep yourself strong inside, not to over dramatize. But I do think a lot is at stake. And you're absolutely right that the government is one of the driving forces behind censorship, and it's always through proxies and cutouts. That's what happened to Alex Jones. I mean, the FBI was all over that, that suit, that civil suit against him that resulted in the $1 billion judgment that for a while almost put him out of business. I mean, that didn't happen in a vacuum, sorry. And so, they have a lot of ways of doing it, and doubtless they'll try. But of course, I mean, but the other thing is I've already been through some of that. Or quite a bit of it, actually. And so I'm certainly not intimidated. Maybe they'll succeed, but it's not going to stop me from talking. I mean, if it gets to the point where I'm like, standing downtown with a bullhorn, okay, that's where we are. But I think we have an obligation to say what we think is true. I personally have a burning need to do that. I can't respect myself if I don't. And so I'm not going to stop. But God knows what's going to happen in the next year, honestly. I mean, you both can feel it. Every person who's paying any attention at all can feel it. There are all these unresolvable conflicts that are coming to a head in the same year.
Right.
And so, it's a huge concern for me.
Yeah.
Well, you've got Israel, you've got Ukraine. I mean, you've got you've got the election, you've got the southern border, you've got child trafficking. I mean, there's a whole host of stories that seem very, very
existential.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to our time at Fox, and of course, you and I got to anchor a show together, co-host a show together. And I'm thinking about the stories that we get to cover now. Are there any stories where you feel like, oh my God, I wouldn't have been able to cover this back then? Or do you feel in some ways liberated by not having the shackles of sort of billionaires that are, kind of controlling the puppet masters behind? Like, are there any specific stories or things you're feeling and liberated in that way?
But you guys were never talking about things like that, like, oh, too bad they don't let us say this. It's almost like you weren't aware of it until you were, which makes me right now.
That is okay.
Yeah. Now I'm Anna
What you
Clayton.
said, that's so insightful. No, but that's what you're saying is so insightful and true, and I couldn't quite put it into the words, but you just did. It's not that, I mean, Clayton and I talked endlessly about the company that we worked for. We spent a lot of time together, of course, and I don't remember either one of us ever saying, gosh, I really want to say this, but I can't. It was more like you don't imagine that certain things, or I'll speak for myself, I could not imagine that certain things could possibly be true. And I felt like I was more open-minded than most people. Clayton certainly was. He was doing UFO research in commercial breaks. So, I think we were more open-minded than a lot of people. But again, speaking for myself, I just couldn't, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds kind of crazy. And I don't know. I just didn't go there in my own head. And now I look back at that period. So it would have been 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16. And there was a lot going on. And I'm revisiting some of those stories from that time and thinking, wait a second, the wackos, or the people I thought were wackos, were really onto something. And maybe not the whole story, but there's definitely something there. And I'll just give you one example, which is and I was writing about it this morning in a piece that we're doing on Julian Assange, who we visited in prison. You know, the emails from the DNC in 2016 that showed that the Hillary campaign had rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders, who had popular support, grassroots support. She did not. She was fully AstroTurf corporate candidate. And they told us that Russia stole those emails. Well, that's not true. And it was kind of obvious at the time that it wasn't true. Bill Binney did a big piece on this in The Nation. Like, as a tech matter, that couldn't have happened. So someone from inside the building leaked those to WikiLeaks, and Assange has effectively said the same thing. So, like, what is that? So there was all this energy invested in convincing the rest of us that Russia did it, that it did not come from within the DNC, and just shut up. You're crazy. You're a conspiracy nut. And they were lying. So what does that mean? Why were they lying? What were they hiding? Something. And so that's the story. And I don't know the answers to all of those questions, but I do know they were lying. I do know Russia didn't do it. And so, you know, I wish I'd spent a lot more time on that story, for example, at the time, but I didn't.
One of the things that strikes me so much about that period, and I was at NBC and you guys were at Fox, is that we were fighting over racism and gender, about whether or not the media was being unfair to Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton. Exactly. And if Fox, you know, and if the right or any media that supported the right really wanted to go after the establishment on the left, why did they leave the war crimes on the table? And so that's what makes me realize that it is two sides of the same coin, because you could have picked up the fact that Obama droned more people in the Middle East than any of his predecessors, the fact that Hillary Clinton was starting wars.
And he won a Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Why were we so busy with race and gender? Why did, you know, and that's what kills me so much, is that if they really wanted to go after the establishment left, why leave all the war? Why leave all the blood on the floor?
Well, I couldn't agree more. And of course, I mean, they do it because conversations about race particularly incite animal fears in people and make them unreasonable immediately. But the truth is that the differences between races, which are real, are not that big. But other differences are big. And the difference between someone who makes $1 billion and a person who makes $50,000 a year, those are much bigger than the difference between the races. Okay, that's just true. And so it is, to some extent, a cover for the crimes of a few when they, you know, gin up race hatred among the population, which they are absolutely doing. That's not organic. I never walk down, I live in this country, I've always lived here. I never walk down, no one ever yells at me because of my race, ever. And I just don't, like, the level of actual racial hostility, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, between the races in the United States is so much lower than they're constantly pretending it is, just in day-to-day life. I know you felt the same way. You don't hear people see people getting in fistfights because they're different colors. What? Right. But if you watched only NBC or these channels, you would think that that was the state of play in the United States. It's not. And so they're telling you that to divert your attention from the wars, which I actually have been passionately against since I went to Iraq in 2003, but not enough, I agree with you, but also from the financial crimes. So you can, like, invent a fake cryptocurrency and steal, you know, billions of dollars from 1 million separate individual investors and give some to your parents to buy beachfront property in the Bahamas, and it's not that big a story. Well, in my view, that's a really big story. That's a huge story. Like, what? The Federal Reserve prints all this money, trillions of dollars. They have a permanent emergency for over 10 years. 0 interest rates. Where does all that money go? So the Fed prints the money. What happens then? Well, it goes to a select number of banks, which have, you know, encoded in regulation, have a special deal where they just get rich no matter what. Well, why is that fair? And by the way, why are we taxing people double for working? You pay half the taxes if you invest as you do if you work. So are we saying investing is twice as virtuous as working? I mean, that's like an actual debate we should have, but we don't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because we're mad about race. So yeah, I totally think we've been had. Totally.
Well, you're going to really piss off Al Gore. You know, Al Gore this weekend said that the mainstream media is really your source for news and information. And if you're alternative media, then of course that's misinformation, and we really need to clamp down on that. The alternative media, the free media, the independent media, that's where you get into trouble. I mean, I'm just thinking about the cornucopia of stories that you've covered that the alternative media covers that the mainstream media doesn't even touch. For instance, why did a lot of people get rich or trade stocks before the October 7th attack? That's a good question. How did people know about that and made lots of money off of that? We could run down the 9/11 story.
And who were those people, by the way?
Right.
That's what I like.
Wouldn't you love to know?
Who were they? Yeah, I would. How about what country were they in? No, I agree with you completely.
So alternative media is seen as, of course, a major threat, and the independent media is seen as a major threat. When you look at, you've been in the belly of the beast. You worked at CNN. You worked at MSNBC. Of course, you worked at Fox as well. Do you see a massive disconnect between the mainstream media and what alternative media is able to cover these days?
Well, I just think it's dying, and the audience numbers show it. I mean, for one thing, in addition to all of the other sins, and by the way, running cover for the most powerful people in your society and pretending you're not doing it, that is a sin, just to be clear. But in addition to that, on a non-moral level, just as a viewer, it's very boring to be, and it's boring for a specific reason. So if I have a mission in what I'm telling you, if the whole point of my telling you this is to convince you of something specific, right? If it's the definition of propaganda, I have to keep repeating it endlessly. I can't sort of veer off into something I find interesting, like how did they build the pyramids? I'm probably not going to get into that because my job is to convince you that Zelensky is Churchill, and so that's all I'm going to talk about, or that whatever it is, whatever the lie is. And so they wind up repeating like the same four stories forever. January 6th was a white supremacist insurrection. Okay. Okay, I disagree. I don't think you're right. But if you tell me that every single day for 3 years, not only does your propaganda fail, with me anyway, because I'm like, why are they telling me this again? But you also drive me off because you're boring me to death. Like, I want to hear something else. I want to hear something interesting. I want curious people gathering my news. Curiosity is the key to the news business. And that's what I always loved about you, Clayton. We'd sit there and you'd be like, can you believe this? Of course, none of it ever made air, but you were like so excited about the thing, about your like intellectual journey in your own head. And that's a prerequisite for journalism. Like, you have to be that kind of person. Like, wait, what a second. Wait, what? How'd that happen? What do you mean? You know what I mean? And they're the opposite of that. They're like, shut up, we know how it happened, and if you ask any questions about how it happened, then you're insane. It's like, no, I'm not insane. Or maybe I'm insane, but it's still a fair question. Do you know what I mean? So like, no one wants to watch that shit, actually. It's stultifying, and their numbers are in such steep decline that NBC News is not going to exist in 10 years. There's no chance. And programs like yours, I checked your numbers as I was sitting waiting to go on. It's like, they're ridiculous. They're huge. And who would have predicted that, actually? You just like, get in the studio with your wife and talk about things you think are interesting, and all of a sudden you've got like a lot of people, my next door neighbor's watching you every day. Who in the world? No, I'm serious though. Who could have predicted that 10 years ago? You'd be like, no, Clayton and his wife have gone off the deep end and they're like talking to themselves in this weird little closet. No. The world is watching them. And that's the model. I'm not joking. Like, it's crazy. It's what's happening now. Last thing I'll say is the promise of the internet originally. The promise originally was, everyone gets a voice, you get to hear all kinds of perspectives. That kind of died for a while. We're hearing one perspective, and it reached its peak when they took Parler off the internet. And now I really think it's reemerging because that other stuff is just, its era has passed, in my opinion.
But I'm scared every day of the things that we talk about, and I realize that the stories that we cover give me politics by cooties. And I realized that I would be non grata in my...
cooties?
Well, yeah, that's what it is, right? Because I'm willing to ask questions about the COVID vaccines. I'm willing to read books about Ukraine's history. I'm willing to spend my weekends doing that, which gives me politics by cooties, which I know now that in the circles I ran in when I was still in the mainstream media would make me seem like a kook. And I'm afraid not only of losing those friendships, but I'm afraid of the fallout that happens around that, things that happen to people that I respect. But at the same time, I care more about the world that we leave our kids, and you can't say nothing right now.
Amen.
So that's the reason that we do this, even though I'm always scared. I mean, you and Clayton don't seem as scared as me.
No,
but
I wanted to ask you that question. Are there stories you're scared to cover? Because there'll be times, and I know you are hit with a torrent of information on a daily basis, way more than I am. And I mean, you have contacts all around the world that are, there's probably someone on the space station right now texting you with information about something. And so are there things that you're scared to cover? You're sitting there saying, wow, this is like soul crushing, like to the point where like it really scares you in your soul.
There are two. Yes, there are two. One is the 2020 election. And I think that I was far too dismissive of some of the claims made about it. And I think there may be some merit to some of the wildest possible claims about that election. And I haven't proven it yet, but I've, look, I'll just say, and you know this, of course, very well, both of you, that whenever you have politics, you've got a lot of sleazy people and liars and people who just want to get their candidate elected or get paid or whatever. You've got a lot of lying around all political campaigns, so it's very hard to know what's true. And sometimes it takes years to figure it out. So there were a lot of stupid mercenaries making claims about fraud in that past election that were, they couldn't back up. But that doesn't mean that all of those ideas were wrong, and I think that some of them were right. Is what I'm learning, and I'll just leave it there. The second thing that bothers me is the UFO story, and the more you dig into that and talk to people with actual knowledge of it, again, that's another story where there are some fanciful ideas floating around that are just there's no evidence that they're true. But if you talk to people who have actual knowledge of it that they gathered themselves, there are parts of that story that I do not understand at all that are really, really, really dark. It's so dark that I haven't told my wife about it. I mean, I haven't verified any of this, but this is not just stuff that I read on the internet. I know you all are very, very grounded in that story, so I think I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But there's some stuff there that's just like, man, I'm not even sure what that means. There's a spiritual component there that I don't fully understand. So yes, that story bothers me. And I think, last thing I'll say, that one of the reasons that we've had all these disclosures and all these, 10 whistleblowers at this point, and it hasn't really become front page news. Part of it's suppression. Parts of the government don't want you to know about it, but part of it is the public can't deal with it. It's too far out. The implications are too profound. And I understand that. Because I've heard things where I'm just like, oh man, I don't even really want to know that, honestly.
Deeply disturbing stuff. Forget like saucers and technology. It's deeply disturbing stuff that I haven't even told Natali. Yep. I agree with you. It's so disturbing. Exactly. I can't even tell my kids. My kids ask me different stories about it, and I won't say it because it's so dark. It's so dark.
I totally agree.
Miles is watching. So.
Okay, Miles, if you're watching the show, Daddy's not going to tell you about that part of the UFO stuff and what's going on with the government.
Well, can I say one thing? They've known clearly, this is, I think, established, and I feel comfortable saying this as fact. The U.S. government, these are real, whatever they are. They're not human. And the government has known that for a long time, possibly going back to the 1930s at least. And, of course, there's tons of evidence in the written record, in the physical record, in paintings, and in literature, that people have been seeing and interacting with these things for a long time. So we know that. But the justification one often hears is, well, the government, various presidents who have been read in, not all have been, haven't wanted to disclose this because it would scare people. And I've always thought that's bullshit. You're hiding a crime, which they are, by the way, in my opinion. But I do think there's a sense in which that's not totally crazy. Like, there is some stuff, if it's true, and I'm kind of thinking it may be true, that's so radical that well, as we both said, we don't want to tell the people we love most about it because, like, why would you disturb someone like that? So I kind of get that. I hate to admit it. I'm not arguing for hiding things. I believe in the truth and I believe in disclosure, but I understand the impulse. Like, holy smokes, this is heavy. You know what I mean?
And the government's involvement in it makes it even heavier because then you realize the complicity.
Exactly.
Of it. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the same thing. I can tell. Okay.
Yeah,
excuse me.
Should I go?
No. This is what we used to talk about in commercial breaks all the time. This is the kind of stuff. Anyway.
So at the time, I never would have believed any of that. But now I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't get you out of here on this, Tucker, which is you've covered politics a long time, and I trust your instincts on this subject more than just about anyone on this subject that I personally know. I've said on this show that I don't think that the deep state When I say the deep state, I mean the permanent government, the people that are there long after the people that are elected come and go and come and go.
For sure.
The deep state will not let Trump become president. That's my own personal belief. Neocons, of course, are lining up behind Nikki Haley. You see the press coverage, the Associated Press. You see the mainstream media, the military-industrial complex wants Nikki Haley, of course. They want to continue to make a lot of money. Biden is a walking vegetable. What do you see happening in 2024? What do your political instincts tell you from having covered this your whole life?
I mean, it's opaque. It's like looking through a shower curtain. You can only see outlines. And I'm not bragging, but one of my few skills is I've called most races pretty accurately because they're pretty obvious. The outlines are obvious years in advance. And certainly a year out, they're very obvious. In this case, it seems irresolvable. So you have, basically every power center in the country will do anything to prevent Trump from winning, anything. I mean, that's the most important thing to them, is to keep Trump from becoming president again. Now, why is that? Is a whole separate and very interesting conversation, but that's just a fact, okay? And these are the same people who are lecturing us about democracy. We're saving democracy. Democracy dies in darkness. Democracy is the most important thing. You heard that creepy defense contractor say what we're really doing is preserving democracy. We're not just like selling weapons. We're preserving democracy, right. Which was a nauseating clip, and I hope on some level he's punished for that. But anyway, but then at the same time, you have Trump is leading the race in every nonpartisan, or all the liberal polls are showing him leading the race, beating Joe Biden in the battleground states. So they can't let him win, but if they don't let him win, then it's just super obvious that all this democracy stuff was fraudulent and that it's not a democracy, it's an oligarchy run by the richest people, that Bernie Sanders, back when he was a free man, was telling the truth. And so at that point, the veil's off. We can't pretend anymore. Like when they killed Kennedy, which they did, they could kind of pretend like everything's fine. But after this election, there's no pretending everything's fine. Everyone will know. And it is a little bit like you get kidnapped, you get thrown in the back of the car, and all of a sudden the kidnapper turns around and lowers his mask and you see his face. And that's not a good thing. Because once you see his face, he has to kill you. Because you know who he is. He can't let you go then, okay? So you sort of want the kidnapper to keep his mask on because the pretense allows him the freedom to let you go in the end and pretend everything's fine. But they've showed us who they are with such unmistakable clarity that I kind of don't know how we get along after this election unless they decelerate and just do what they should do, which is look, we don't like Trump, here's why. We don't think he's good for the country, here's why. We think Joe Biden's great, here's why. America, make your choice. But I don't think they are going to do that. They're morally obligated to do that, but they won't. And it's incumbent on them to do that. Stop charging them with bullshit crimes that your own people skate on. That's the truth. Stop that. Just let the election happen. Let's have a free and fair election for the first time in a while. Since 2016. And if they allowed that to happen, I think the country would get better. And then if Trump is a crappy president, okay, we survived it the first time. He's not very radical, actually. He's pretty moderate. We'll be fine. But I think they're too hysterical to allow that to happen. And so I'm very, very worried about it.
Yeah, it's incredibly troubling what's about to happen in this next year. Well, I want you to tell us, before you get out of here, Tucker, tell us about the network. How does it work? So Tucker Carlson Network. I mean, this is amazing. They call you up. They say, we'd like you to come in for a job interview. We've seen your work at the Tucker Carlson Network. You seem like a good fit. You have a name that fits with our network. We'd like to hire you as the face of our network. And I think it's a great fit.
The things I had to do to get the job. I was young. I needed the money. It was not just a casting couch. It was a casting waterbed. And I'm not proud of it, but whatever. The past is gone. We can't relive it. No, you just go to tuckercarlson.com. It's like any other. I mean, a lot of our content will appear with no charge at all, continue to appear on X, and others will appear in truncated form. But there's going to be a lot of content. We're doing a ton of documentaries, going around the world, talk to a bunch of different really, really interesting people, and then we're just doing what we've always done, which is interviews with people who are saying things that aren't allowed to be said in other places, but that we think are true. And the only promise I guess I would make about it is I can't promise we'll never be wrong. I've certainly been wrong before. Probably we'll do so again, unfortunately, but we will never lie. No lying. So it's going to be as honest as a news organization has ever been. And I'm fanatical about that because I think it's the right thing to do, but I also think it's the source of strength. I think if you keep telling the truth, not just in public, but also in private, you become stronger. And I think people can feel that, and they back off when they know that you're committed to telling the truth.
Yes,
it's one of my quirky beliefs, but it's sincere.
But your superpower is not giving a shit when people hit at you. And Clayton learned a lot from that, actually, because, you know, you guys at commercial breaks, I would say, how does he take that? Or he said that on the air and they wrote this about him. And you were literally like, I don't give an F. I don't look at it.
Yeah,
and so
it's been an inspiration.
The harder they try, the less it penetrates your superhuman shield. And I think that that's something we all can take away. So that for that reason, you were always a great influence on my husband. Also, you made us have a third baby. So I'll always thank you for that.
Aren't you glad you did?
I am. Yeah, people don't know that when Tucker and Clayton worked together, we had two, and he came home every weekend and was like, Tucker said we got to have this third one. And I was like, he doesn't have to carry it. And we did.
We did.
Yeah. So because Tucker was on the bandwagon that we needed to have this
family. We need family. We need to procreate. We need more procreation in the United States.
And then there was Eve.
Yeah.
So the first and the last woman in the family. Yeah.
Well,
I love that. First woman of the world, last woman of our family.
Well, Tucker, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I know you're a very busy man these days. I'm sure you're pulled in 80 different directions. So we're thankful of the time, and we really appreciate it. And congrats. When we heard the news and about the launch of the network, we're really excited. I think it's going to be fantastic for free speech and for getting unvarnished truth out there that in a way that we probably haven't seen before. So we're thrilled. We're thrilled to have you in this major part of this conversation. So thank you, my friend. Great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
go get him.
Congrats on your success. I love it. See you guys.
Thank you, man.
Bye.
Go get him. Thanks, Tucker.
That was so fun.
All right, so check out tuckercarlson.com is the place to go and sign up.
Someone in the chat says, have the fourth.
Yeah, have the fourth. No, that ship. We're not doing that.
Three babies only.
Three babies is good. Three babies is good. So thanks to Tucker for that. That's great. We really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for subscribing and being a part of our show here at Redacted. We really appreciate it. We are live Monday through Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That's when we do this show, Monday through Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And we try to cover the news that mainstream media does not. And we try to see our way through all of this crazy clown world and propaganda on a regular basis. And we do have a daily newsletter. Please sign up for the daily newsletter. Again, it's totally free. Just go over to redacted.inc. That's the place to go. And again, it'll be delivered to your inbox first thing in the morning. You can read it over your cup of coffee. We kind of give you a preview of what's coming up on the show every night. Plus, we cover, again, 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day. You can read it in about 5 or 10 minutes. We cover some of the market news, what's going on with gold, silver, some of the markets, plus some things you might have missed. We try to do it with a little sense of humor. And, it's a great way to start your day. Redacted.inc. Thank you guys, all of you, for subscribing to the channel. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Much love to all of you.